Hi, I'm Nicole Dickey, and welcome to Part 8, the final installment of Becoming Fearless. Today we are talking about courage as we dig into the last two chapters of Acts 27 and 28. You see, the world would like to define courage as the absence of fear, but true courage is something we obtain through the process of facing our fears, and almost like a trophy on the other side, as we are courageous in overcoming our fears. Okay, so we're digging straight into Acts 27. If you remember where we left Paul, he was actually imprisoned because of believing in Jesus, because spreading the gospel. He appeals to Caesar so that way he can get a fair trial, and now he's on his way to Rome. Now, this isn't like some little journey over to the next town. We're talking a 2,000-mile journey that must be done by boat. Now, it's also, we're talking like September, October, November right now, which is the worst season to be in a boat because this is before navigation, right? So the way that they tell where they're going is all through the stars. They didn't have compasses or anything like that. And this is a very stormy season, so it's very hard to know where they're going. So we're going to start right off in Acts 27. And here, Paul is on the boat, and he says in Acts 27:10, "Men," he said, "I believe there is trouble ahead if we go on. Shipwreck, loss of cargo, and danger to our lives as well. But he is not a guest on the ship. He is a prisoner." And so, of course, they discard all that he is saying, and they keep on going. But Paul doesn't stop there, right? We're going to dig to 27:21. And Paul says, "Men, you should have listened to me." Okay, this is after what Paul said happened. They ended up getting in a storm. They lost cargo. Things were not going well. They were lost at sea for pieces of time. And Paul says again later, "Men, you should have listened to me in the first place and not left Crete. You would have avoided all this damage and loss. But take courage." We're going to come back to that. "None of you will lose your lives, even though the ship will go down. For last night an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve, stood beside me. And he said, 'Don't be afraid, Paul, for you will surely stand trial before Caesar. What's more, God in his goodness has granted safety to everyone sailing with you. So take courage.'" Paul is giving all his shipmates, all the fellow prisoners, everybody on the ship, a message: take courage. You see, it didn't end there. They actually were at sea, kind of lost at sea for 2 more weeks. They land on the island of Malta, and then we're going to revisit him in verse 31. He says, Paul said to the commanding officer and the soldiers, you will all die unless the sailors stay abroad." So they're basically getting ready to land on this island. They're getting scared, and they decide to bail ship. And Paul's saying, "Don't bail, stay on the ship." But something different happens this time. They actually listen to him. Remember before they didn't listen to him? Then he spent time encouraging them, imparting his own courage. And guess what? Now he's warning them, and they listen to him. They stay on the boat. They land shipwrecked on the island of Malta, but they all survive. All right? So he keeps on encouraging. We see in verse 34, and we encourage you to read this on your own. It says, "Please eat something now for your own good, for not a hair on your heads will perish." I mean, there's so many verses in here where Paul just keeps encouraging. And these are people that are taking him to his trial, right? They're not his BFFs. But he is imparting courage into these men. All right, courage. If courage is something we obtain when we're facing our fears, it's like a trophy, like I was courageous, that we can hold up after facing our fears. That's Paul. You look at his life, and he had so much courage. But he didn't just hold up his own courage and like hoard it inside of him. You see him giving what? Encouragement. All right? Encouragement, I love the definition of encouragement, is the action of giving someone support, confidence, and hope. The act of encouragement is giving people our own courage that we have. But where do we get our courage? Here's what I have to tell you. I believe the courage is inside of you all along. It's tapping into something. It's believing in who God is. It's believing in who God made you, and knowing I will see this through. When we face our fears, it does take a level of courage. As we talk about becoming fearless, fear is something I have battled my whole life, not just in like a minor scale, but it's something that has controlled areas of my life. So this whole becoming fearless is talking to me just as much as it is hopefully speaking to you. When I was in middle school, I lived in Indiana in a farmhouse surrounded by 4 cornfields, probably the safest place you could ever be in the United States, right? I was terrified that somebody was going to break into my house and take me. So I booby-trapped my door. I closed my bedroom door, and it started out with like 4 nail polishes sitting behind the door. What grew to like literally probably 24 bottles of nail polish, 25 bottles of lotion. Everything I owned stood in front of my door. So if my mom came to wake me up in the morning, she couldn't even get into my room, or she'd open the door and things would go flying. That was the point, right? I was going to know if somebody walked into my room. But something little had actually taken control of me, like fear normally does, right? It starts so little and it grows. And I found myself very fearful of something that to others may seem so silly, but to me was so real. I remember going to a prayer gathering and they started praying over me because we were talking about fear, and I'm like, oh, that's me. Like, I know this probably isn't right. And they prayed over me. And that night I had to be courageous. Like, I had a choice of either like I was going to line up all my bottles or I was not. And I remember that. Like, yeah, that was so many years ago, but I remember having to tap into that courage within me and go, okay, I will be courageous. I am not going to line my door with nail polishes and lotions. God is with me. He is going to protect me. And I'm not going to lie. I slept with my hardback Bible like embedded in my chest that night. It was probably the most uncomfortable night of sleep, but I was going to be like as close to Jesus as I could because he was my courage, right? And since then, yes, my faith in the Lord has grown so much, and maybe fear is like a little bit different than that now, but it can still be just as real as it was then, and it can still control us. But it's tapping into the courage that God has put in us. It's tapping into who we know God is and standing firm on that and finding our courage right there. You see, I believe that courage, it calls fear out for what it is, right? Courage says, hey, okay, you're silly for putting all those nail polishes by the door. Or, hey, right now, like, I deal with the what ifs, right? Like, I can work myself into a tizzy by dealing with, like, what's going to happen if, and I could, like, cry and everything else. Courage calls that out and says, Nikki, you're foolish for doing that. You know what? You need to stand firm on the truth, firm on what you know. That's courage. Courage calls out fear for what it really is. Courage says, hey, fear, like, I know I'm not going to go through life without you being present, but you will not hold the driver's seat. That's what courage says. Courage moves through fear. It finds yourself on the other side. And I love that. I love that we can stand on the other side and say, I was courageous. I faced my fears. And guess what? Like, I saw it through. I am better off because of it. Paul walked in courage by being an encourager. You see, Paul's journey doesn't stop there. They're on the island of Malta for roughly 3 months. Then they do make it to Rome. He's on house arrest, but during that time, he's sharing about Jesus with everyone that comes into his presence at his home. You see, Paul does end up not escaping, but he does end up kind of getting free from this trial, and he's set free as a free man and actually goes on to his 4th missionary journey to tell more people about Jesus. But Paul's troubles don't stop there. His troubles actually increase. You see, I believe that when we face our fears and we get to the other side, guess what? There's a whole nother set of fears waiting for us. But that's the beauty of courage. We take the courage from the lessons learned and we set it as a foundation, and we embrace more courage as we walk through more fears and becoming fearless. Aren't we always growing? God is always molding us into the women he wants us to be. You see, being a Christian during this time took courage. The book of Acts isn't about Paul. It isn't even about Peter. The book of Acts is about the early church and the spread of the gospel, which took so much courage. People were being killed left and right. Women, children, men. Children were orphaned as parents were killed. The early church had so many sacrifices. They had so many courageous moments in order for you and I to be sitting here today talking about the love of Jesus. You see, courage not only changes our lives, but it changes the lives of other people. It changes their story as we become courageous. You see, we get to be the givers of courage. When we find ourselves on the other side of that fear and we have that trophy of courage, guess what we get to do? We get to be the encouragers, and we get to impart that courage into other people as we encourage them in their walk with the Lord and encourage them to face those fears and become fearless because God's plan is so big for their life. We hope you have enjoyed this study of becoming fearless. We know we have enjoyed doing it for you. Drop us some comments. Let us know what you enjoyed about it, perhaps other studies you'd like to do or hear us talk about. We love you, ladies, and we will see you again very soon.